Major chili news. The Bengals chili sponsor has changed. We're going to spend some time there, in addition to focusing, of course, on the NFL draft with topics like Jahmyr Gibbs, a kick returner, first round scenarios. We're going to dive into a mailbag in today's episode.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, where you can subscribe to this program on YouTube or follow anywhere you get your podcast. Become a first listener, become an everydayer. We tease Brian Callahan. He will be on the show. We had to push it to tomorrow for the recording, so we should be hearing from Callahan on this program tomorrow. Might be Sunday. We'll see how things shake out. Duke Tobin also addressing the media on Thursday, and we'll have to talk about that as well as we gear up for the draft. But
tell them why
James,
we don't. Tell them why real quick we don't have Brian Callahan.
Well, it's because he's working.
They had to take Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson to a dinner, exclusive top 30. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Look at James giving the running back some love.
Josh Vann, a wide receiver / returner from South Carolina, however, reportedly is visiting the Bengals. So maybe it's that. But we knew that it was the middle of his workday. He has work to do, which is probably good news for Bengals fans, right? Brian Callahan grinding before the draft and offseason programs going on as well. So, relatively busy time of year for the Cincinnati Bengals. So we'll talk to him in the near future. Still planned, still something that we're going to do. Instead, today we get big chili news, James. We're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to have a little chili draft. Skyline Chili taking over as the official chili of the Cincinnati Bengals, replacing Gold Star Chili, longtime partner with the Bengals. 21 years for Gold Star. Great run there. Skyline certainly more well-known, right? I would say. Has a greater chunk of the market share in Cincinnati, and now they strike the deal with the Bengals. And they are also in Great American, so I assume that's both professional major league teams in Cincinnati now. I guess I don't know about MLS.
No, they have MLS. They also have the Cincinnati Bearcats as well. So, yeah, good for Skyline. And I know a lot of people were excited. Here's what I'll say. In the words of Chad Johnson, Locked On Bengals is open. Cincinnati chili places, we are open. So if Skyline wants to get on the Bengals train even more, open. Gold Star, if you want to counterpunch, Locked On Bengals is open.
And if you're mad because we didn't mention you, Camp Washington? Is that
Camp Washington,
yeah.
Blue Ash Chili, Price Hill Chili. Of course, all the locals, of course we're open. I would love that. I'm not trying to downplay that. I just – when you're talking about this corporate battle between Skyline and Gold Star,
I'm just trying to plant the FOMO for all the brands out there that are going to want to get a piece of this pie.
Chili eater, equal opportunity, my man.
Yeah. Let's get into some football topics. We'll circle back to Skyline to end the show for anybody who is not interested in chili talk. We'll get to the football first. The chili stuff is at my heart, and I'm hungry. We're both always hungry when we record this show. So we'll save it to the end so we can go eat right after we finish recording. Let's start with some Jahmyr Gibbs discussion, James. We've talked in depth and less depth in passing about Jahmyr Gibbs, and Randy R. at Biter's Snow Dog asked, would Jahmyr Gibbs work in the offense? And he asked me specifically, I think about this because I wasn't as high on him, or people think I'm not very high on him if they watched, the film review. But he seems perfect to bring the explosiveness the Bengals have been lacking. And James, I know you think, and perhaps the Bengals think, that he fits them in some very specific ways that can make their offense more difficult to defend.
For sure. I mean, you're talking about, imagine if Joe Mixon, he caught 60-something passes last year, right? 60 passes. How many of those were checkdowns? Imagine if it felt like he could take any of those checkdowns at any moment for huge plays. Not 8 yards, 10 yards, but 30 yards, 40 yards. The same way you feel when Jamar Chase catches a screen or a 7-yard slant or something of that nature. That's where he fits, is it's not like you're going to be able to give Jahmyr Gibbs that type of high-end attention that you give these receivers. And so if he's matched up one-on-one, he's more than likely going to win. And he's not – and we don't have the full testing profile, which I think prevents him from rising up boards even more. But in a pass-first offense like the Bengals, you ready for take, Jake? He's one of the instant impact guys in this draft. Like I know we got a question about, do you want instant impact? Do you want long-term? How much will they contribute? The Super Bowl window, all of those things. I think Jahmyr Gibbs has an instant impact, much like we've seen out of some of these running backs that have fallen to the second round. It's just different for Gibbs because this is a pass-first offense. So it might not be between the tackles where he makes a huge impact, but I think he would make an impact and make defenses have to worry about him. And I think he would look good in that number 0. Side note, first player in Bengals history to wear 0. I think he'd look pretty good if he went that route.
Yeah, the big calling card for Jahmyr Gibbs is explosion and speed. And receiving ability. Receiving ability, a huge part of that. Natural receiver transitions from receiver to runner really, really quickly, really, really smoothly, hits his top speed, has incredible short area burst. And that is in and of itself a weapon. Like you said, if you take a check down and you threaten an explosive off a check down, that is adding something that they don't really have. Like Joe Mixon is a good receiving back. Don't get me wrong about that. He is a good receiving back. He was roughly average. I think Paul Dehner Jr. over at The Athletic put together a chart with the running backs that had 60, 70 plus targets in the NFL. He's roughly average in terms of yards per catch. On short targets or targets behind the line of scrimmage. Let's start with targets behind the line of scrimmage. He averaged nearly 10 yards after catch, which is pretty good. On targets in the short area of the field, he averaged 5.8 yards after the catch. So it's not like he was a bad receiver, but he doesn't have the track speed that Jahmyr Gibbs would offer. And that's the big difference. I don't think he's quite as smooth transitioning from receiver to runner either. I think there's a little bit more gather with him, with Joe Mixon. And so that burst and that explosion with Gibbs, I think is very threatening. You get him on the perimeter. Again, you have that home run threat every time he touches a ball, which Joe Mixon just doesn't quite do at this point, which isn't to say, again, that he's a bad receiving back. He's actually pretty good at it. As the Bengals finally used him in a greater capacity, they started checking down a lot more this year as defenses played more too high. And that's one of the ways Gibbs helps you answer. So we talked about like Darnell Washington is this tight end answer to too high. You want to stay too high, we're going to attach Darnell Washington, and you have to deal with him as a mismatched tight end. You have to deal with him as essentially an extra tackle, but an extra tackle who runs a 4.5 something, right? And so that's one way you can answer the too high safeties. Another way is you put a guy that linebackers simply cannot run with underneath, and you say, we're going to get the ball to Gibbs, and he's going to make your linebackers angle bad, and you're going to give up 15 yards on a check down to the flat. And so that's the fit. The part where he doesn't fit, and maybe where people think I'm not as high on Gibbs, is that Alabama had a lot designed for him. So the Bengals would have to incorporate some of that with Jahmyr Gibbs. He's not an every down back right now. His size is an issue insofar as how he's going to handle running between the tackles. Almost never ran between the tackles at Alabama. So if you want to run him in the running game, you got to get him to the perimeter. How predictable is that? We talked about Joe Mixon versus Samaje Perine and tipping plays last year, and that was a big topic early in the season. You might remember when the offense wasn't going yet. And he's much more of a zone back than a gap downhill, the kind of game the Bengals have transitioned to in their running game. So there are some things that would have to be different for him, and he's a sub-package player, not an every down player right now. But that upside that you talk about, that's where the fit is in terms of adding an element that they don't currently have that can threaten other teams. Now, is that worth a first-round pick? Because that's where you probably have to take him. That's the big question. That's what they have to figure out.
And he won't be there at 60. DeJuan Jones has a better chance to be there at 60 than Jahmyr Gibbs. We've talked about this. The running back class, there's a lot of different kind of guys, but I think he's clearly one of the big three, so to speak, three guys that are going to go. And really, it's a big two, I think. Going in the top 40. I don't think Zach Charbonnet is going to necessarily be in consideration in the top 40, even high end. And so do you trust him as a pass protector? You mentioned his size. He's just under 200 pounds. If he's already a part-time player, is it 60% of the time on the field or is it 40%? Because he's a heck of a weapon. But if it's 40%, that's tough. If you think you can get him to 60%, well, then that's Joe Mixon. And I think you feel comfortable there, especially in this offense that throws it all around. So that's certainly a dilemma, and we should continue the draft conversation coming up next. But today's show is brought to you by Built Bars. And maybe Jahmyr Gibbs hovering around that 200 pounds. Well, he needs to get the number one protein bar on the planet for a post-workout protein punch. Built.com, by the way, is, well, announcing something very, very special. And I can't reveal all of the details yet, but the excitement is real, and it's something you're not going to want to miss. And if you're new to Locked On Bengals and you haven't heard us talk about Built Bars before, Built Bars are the number one protein bar on the planet, covered in 100% chocolate, low sugar, low calories, a ton of protein. Mark your calendars and head to Built.com on Saturday, April 22nd, this Saturday, to be one of the first to discover their announcement, what all of the hype is about. We can't wait for you to check it out. And if you want to make your order today, just go to Built.com and use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off your order.
That's very exciting stuff. I'm excited to see what's going on there. Okay, James, let's continue.
Maybe they signed and officially endorsed Jahmyr Gibbs. Oh, no, wait, that would be me at 28. Oh, okay, go ahead.
I feel like we need that Mean Girls meme. Stop trying to make Jahmyr Gibbs happen.
Yeah,
that isn't going to happen.
Let me be honest here. So 28 is tough. But most of the guys we talk about at 28, I don't think will have the impact that Gibbs would have right now. And add a whole nother wrinkle and give Burrow this extra chess piece. And so that's the really enticing, tempting part, especially if they think he can pass block, which is a question mark because we don't know that. And so that's the attraction to me. Now, in a perfect world, if the right guy isn't there, they're able to move down, add a pick, get Gibbs at 35. I also don't love the idea of waiting around all night Thursday and no pick happening. So we will see. But I don't think Gibbs will be in my final, 3 when it comes to predicting what the Bengals do at 28, just to be clear for our listeners.
Yeah. And the thing about his pass blocking, really quick note there, is that you see him go through the mental part of it on tape. Whereas a guy like Israel Abanikanda, if you're talking about home run threats in the draft, who also doesn't have the receiving ability of Gibbs, you don't see him go through it mentally on tape. If he's releasing, he's just releasing. There's no check release with him. You see Gibbs routinely working through visual progression, trying to figure out where he needs to go. The knowledge, the process is there with Gibbs, which gives you, I think, a little bit more to project going forward for him than somebody who just hasn't done it and just isn't a passing down back at all, which Abanikanda is off the field for Pitt by contrast a lot of the time on passing downs.
So Abanikanda, fall of day 3. Gibbs at 28, Abanikanda round 5. Let's roll out the best RB duo in the league. What do you think?
Nobody who pass blocks.
Hey, Zeke is still out there. If you're really worried about that, he is still out there.
Let's talk about some other positions here.
Yeah,
James.
Let's do it.
Let's stay on the offensive side of the ball here for a moment. Flyer fanatic, loud fan on Twitter would like to know, what do you think the Bengals' plan is for replacing Tyler Boyd? Draft this year, free agency draft next year, replacement already on the roster. And this is a topic of conversation in a draft that is down at receiver, and the Bengals have 7 picks. And those are the confounding factors for me.
Yeah, I think it's down at receiver. There are some good slot receivers, but does the right one fall? Does the board fall to them? And I think this is something they've been in on. The Jamar Chase draft, I think they were open to taking a second receiver. It just didn't work. Last year, I think they wanted a receiver, and it just didn't fall their way. This year, 7 picks, given the depth, given how bad this receiver class is. I love receivers, and you got me talking about a running back. in round one. And that's the takiest thing I think I've dropped. I think it's tough. So when you look at a Boyd replacement, it's part of the reason why I'm so high on Dalton Kincaid. And if he's there at 28, I would do a little gritty up to the podium and teach Roger Goodell how to do it, because that's what would be happening a lot at Paycor Stadium if you added a dynamic pass catcher like that. In my eyes, I think it would completely transform things, and then that would be your Tyler Boyd insurance, because he can be that long term. That said, I think that there's a very real possibility that they add some type of late day 3 receiver. They've looked at a decent amount of them. But is that Tyler Boyd's replacement necessarily? No, that might just be a special teamer. That, like you mentioned, that might be a return guy. That might be a fringe roster guy. And so I don't know if they're going to be able to add Tyler Boyd's replacement in this draft. And if they don't do that, well, the good news is they're a free agency destination. The good news is next year's wide receiver class will certainly be better. And I haven't even looked at it. I would just assume it would be better. And the Bengals could go that route as well. Or maybe they sign Boyd to a cheap deal. And that's the thing that we don't see coming. And I think that might be the least likely. But there is a chance of that, I would say.
Yeah, and if you're looking in the mid rounds, which is where this starts to become a possibility, barring an unforeseen fall for a guy like Jackson Smith and Jigba,
Oh my God.
There are some guys that stand out from a profile perspective that are similar in some ways to Tyler Boyd. And one of them that I don't think we've mentioned his name a single time is, and I'm probably going to mess up his name because we haven't mentioned it a single time, Keyshawn Boot, the LSU wide receiver. Booty? Okay.
It's Booty.
All right. Great. Here's why it's like Tyler Boyd, right? Tyler Boyd didn't test like a great athlete. Booty didn't test like a great athlete, but was very productive, is an early declare, and is 21 years old.
Yep.
And Tyler Boyd coming out very young. Think about T. Higgins, didn't test great, very young. And so we've seen this trend for wide receivers where when they're really young coming out, if they don't test great, it's not necessarily as big of a deal as it could otherwise be. Like, obviously you want them to test really well as well, but Booty was a guy that, like, before we really got into the draft, was talked about as a day 2, early day 2 kind of guy. And I think in some places was considered a day 1 prospect, but before the whole draft season started. And Parker Washington from Penn State, also 21 years old, has an injury, very productive. Both of those guys, I think, could hypothetically fit the mid-round slot target.
I agree. I'm glad you brought up Keyshawn Booty, because I think he goes under the radar partially because we just haven't covered receiver much. But he's very interesting because he was considered the dude, the next LSU star receiver in this long line now where you look at Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry, and then you fast forward and and I'm going to be missing guys, by the way, of course, but then you have Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. And it was like, oh, well, he's going to be the next guy. And it didn't come together for a bunch of reasons. And you can look at quarterback play and a bunch of stuff. Is that someone at 21 that the Bengals would look at and say, well, we don't need you this year to be a huge contributor, but man, we'd be willing to bet that we can get you in our culture, in our system, and make that work to where you can be the next guy, or a Parker Washington. You're right. I think that there's some intriguing guys in this draft, and I think they're open to receiver, and they should be. That receiver room is shallow. I know it's got a ton of talent at the top, but it is shallow, and the depth gets tested really quick, and it was last year, and we saw it in the AFC title game. Could you nab one of these guys in the mid rounds? Could one of them fall? I think they could. So what would the earliest be realistically that they take a receiver? I feel like it would be round 3 if someone really, really fell, but more than likely if they take one, it'll be on day 3. And, if Jackson Smith and Jigba falls to 28, well, hell froze over and they made the pick, but I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, it would be pretty darn surprising to see Njigba available at 28. If that does happen, though, I mean, you have to believe the Bengals would be strongly considering, like, checks.
I mean,
pretty much every box that they would be after. So
if that happened, we would be having a different conversation about Boyd. I think. Like I'm not trying to be.
I think you would have to consider, and you're referring to potentially a trade.
Yeah. And not that you'd have to, but man, you just have this Super Saiyan rookie to put in the slot. You don't want to take him off the field, So I think that they would go that route. But we still have plenty to do mailbag wise, and maybe I'll actually read one of these questions. It's just not timed out right, Jake. We're out of rhythm today, but we'll continue the mailbag coming up next.
I think the rhythm's great, but go ahead.
No, rhythm. We usually try to alternate, and I'm making you ask all the questions, which is fine with me. It doesn't bother me at all, but it's just like, all right. Anyways, man, we do have a lot of Boyd questions in here, but that said, and we kind of answered this as far as kick returner goes. Houday what is this? At Bunny_91. Maybe this is a big Trey Hendrickson fan. Do the Bengals look to add a kick returner in the later rounds? If so, who stands out to you? Just to be clear, Brandon Wilson's still on the roster. Trent Taylor, they re-signed to a 1-year deal. Chris Evans still on the roster. Travion Williams still on the roster. So those are the guys that either fielded kicks or, in Wilson's case, could field kicks and did in the past. And then obviously Taylor fields punts.
Yeah, I think that they've got guys now if they need them, but they are kicking the tires on late round guys. Another receiver, by the way, that we should have mentioned is the Princeton Andre Iosivas or however his last name happens to be pronounced. But anyway, they're doing work on some guys that are late round potential return options. Josh Vann, the guy we mentioned earlier, was a returner. Mm-hmm. And that's one that is worth mentioning. But there are a few return options. Most of them receiver. If Gibbs is a guy, he has some return experience at Alabama as well. So I would not be surprised. I kind of expect them, based on the work they've done, to try to add a returner at some point here. At the same time, the NFL doesn't want people returning kicks. The rule suggestions suggest that the NFL doesn't want people returning punts with the touchback rule proposals for punt returns, that a touchback will go out to the 25 instead of the 20 on punts. I don't know if that was ratified by the NFL. But, the return game is continually getting diminished. So, how important is it to the Bengals? How important is it to Darren Simmons when you have some guys on the roster with some experience, at least Travion Williams and Trent Taylor? They were fine with them all year last year. So I wonder how much it'll be prioritized, but it is something where they seem to be kicking the tires a little bit around the later part of the draft.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see returner only type picks where it's like, it's a burner. And
the Trey Tuckers.
We'll try to teach
Turner.
Do you think he can run a go route and track the ball? If so, then that changes things, right? Or do you think he can develop into the shifty slot guy? But yeah, he could be the returner. I think he's interesting. And it's different when you're talking 6th, 7th round. He met with every team, by the way.
Really?
Yeah. The Bearcats receiver. So that part is interesting. There's definitely interest there. That said, I think that running back would be the sneaky one here. Because the more I look at it, let's say they don't get Robinson and Gibbs, and they take your guy Roschon Johnson at 92. A lot of people are celebrating, right? And I think it would be a good pick. I also want some speed. Can you find a running back that can return some punts or kicks and help in that special teams room while also helping in the backfield later in the draft? My guy Deuce Vaughn, can he do it? I don't know. Maybe. Is that a guy that can do it? And I don't think they're necessarily going to draft him because he's half of my height, but that's certainly something that would be interesting. So don't sleep on the running back spot either. Or maybe there's a corner out there, back end of the draft corner, that they're like, hey, he could help in the return game as well. So there's some other spots. I just don't want to mention receiver and pivot it to that when there could be a guy or two that they're looking that's under the radar where that could help them in a variety of different roles.
Should mention a couple of running backs then that would fit that mold. A-Chain from A&M, Kenny McIntosh from Georgia, Keaton Mitchell.
Yep.
Did not return, but you would think he could return with the speed that he has. Can he develop that part of the game? You would think that if he was going to do it, he would have done it. Would have done it in
A-Chain's
college.
interesting. A-Chain's pretty
A-Chain
interesting.
has the
I know you
speed.
said him, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So those are the guys at running back. Just quickly skimming through the Beast, the Dane Brugler draft guide, which has 308 pages of ridiculously in-depth information. Marvin Mims at wide receiver, just talking about the receivers again. Jaden Reed, who's another slot target, by the way. Nathaniel Dell, Tank Dell from Houston, slot target, has return experience. Michael Wilson, who am I remembering correctly that they met with Michael Wilson? Did I make that up? I might have made that up. Michael Wilson from Stanford, however, also has return ability. So Charlie Jones, Purdue, there's a lot of guys. Trey Tucker, we talked about. A lot of guys in this draft, at receiver in particular, is really what stands out to me, have a lot of receiving experience.
Yeah, so we'll see where they go there. One more before we get the skyline. I know we have the Cincinnati chili question of the day, but before that, at Jarno Sawo, SAWO on Twitter, asking, and I might have butchered his name. I think I did, but that's okay. Sorry, man, if I did. First round, which one do you go with? Offensive playmaker, defensive playmaker, trenches. So I will make the picks here of the player because it's so general. Offensive playmaker, we will do both tight ends. All right. To each their own. Let's say Kincaid and Mayer are both there. Defensive playmaker, let's go with Forbes, Emmanuel Forbes, the corner. And trenches, DeJuan Jones, the right tackle from Ohio State, where I think a lot of listeners, a lot of Bengals fans are just comfortable, like you said, taking him at 28. And I'm not sure the Bengals or the NFL is, but I think that would be interesting. So the two tight ends, Forbes and Jones, who you taking?
Yeah, the issue with the issue with Jones is that you can probably just get him later, are the vibes. And he didn't test, and he is an outlier for weight. And we've seen it work, and in a lot of ways, I see a lot of Orlando Brown in his game, but that's not the pick for me there, just because I think you can get him later. And then it's Emmanuel Forbes or either of the top two tight ends in the draft. And if you love Emmanuel Forbes, like our friend Joe Goodberry, who we spent a lot of time with yesterday, if you missed that episode, talking about a bunch of different options in the first round, including Emmanuel Forbes, then he's just the best prospect. Could be just the best prospect for you, right? And then that's a pick, and that's easy. You're walking away. You're happy. He is a playmaker on defense. The offensive weapons, though, for a team like the Bengals get pretty darn tantalizing. And then the debate is depth at corner in the draft, really strong corner draft, depth at tight end in the first two rounds of the draft, really strong early tight end draft. It comes down to me between those two guys, which has a higher grade, period. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I say, if you think that Emmanuel Forbes is straight up the better prospect, you pick Emmanuel Forbes. If you think Kincaid or Mayer is straight up the better prospect, you pick one of them. Because to me, between those two buckets of guys, the tight ends and Forbes, you can do a toss-up.
Yeah. I'll rank them. I'll just rank all four. Shocker here. Dalton Kincaid 1 for me. This is going to surprise some, and it's going to make Cincinnatians mad, I think. 2 would be Emmanuel Forbes. 3, Michael Mayer. 4, DeJuan Jones, in that order. And I think Jones, you're right. I would love the right tackle. To me, he's in that Jahmyr Gibbs bucket, whether people want to admit it or not, where it's more like a trade down scenario if they take him with their first pick of the draft, not necessarily a contender, full-on contender or number one contender for that 28th pick. But Dalton Kincaid in this offense, I can't shake it. And I don't think he'll make it there necessarily, but if he does, I'd be pretty excited about that. And then Emmanuel Forbes, it's close between him and Mayer. Mayer's clean. Forbes is clean. The only concern is his weight a little bit. Maybe we'll get him some Skyline, add on a few LBs with some Built Bars, and we'll be good to go.
You can definitely accomplish those goals with the Skyline plus Built Bar diet, if that is a goal. Let's quickly, because I really wanted to do this, John Sheeran and many others had Skyline-related inquiries. John suggested we do a Skyline chili menu item draft, James. Let's just go 3 rounds here.
Okay.
My board goes 3 players deep. and then I'm trading out.
That's fine.
Or just aborting my picks. I only care about 3 items here.
You get the first pick. Go ahead.
3-way. Classic.
Cholito.
That's your thing, right?
It is. Cholitos are amazing. And
I just gave you
I just gave you conies. I could take it or leave it with the spaghetti. Doesn't matter. You could get sour cream too. I could take it or leave it.
I'm passing on conies. You're welcome. This is a shocker of the draft. I'm passing on conies because for me, the hot dog is just an unnecessary part of what's in the bun. And
that's
for me,
right. That's
the
right.
chili cheese sandwich is number 2 for me. I love the chili cheese sandwich. There's just more salt in the hot dog than I need. There's more process than I need. And it's already, there's already a lot going on in terms of salt and whatnot in Skyline. So for me, that chili cheese sandwich is a lovely balance of the saltiness of the cheese and that delicious chili.
I get conies and Cholitos.
You get conies.
Dude, this is like, what is this like? Is this like Darnell Wright falling to 28 and then at 60, Sam Laporta just staring at you? And you're like, oh my God. Is this like Kalijah Kancey at 28 and then Jahmyr Gibbs at 60? I don't know what it's like, but I'll take conies. And yes, extreme cheese on the side because sometimes I like to have some extreme cheese in my life. Sometimes I don't. Have you had their extreme cheese?
You traded for an extra pick to get yourself an extra item here in the sandwich round. The extreme cheese extra bonus pick for James. That's all right. I wasn't going to pick that next.
Oh, I didn't think that was a pick. I just thought
that's a bonus pick.
Is it? Well, then I'll just go with cheese conies.
No, I'm just giving you a hard time. This is a win-win. This is a win-win, right? Like I'm thrilled with my take home.
Yeah.
And you're thrilled with your take home. Everybody's happy. My number 3 is the chili cheese fries. I'm a fan of chili cheese fries in general. And I like Skyline's chili cheese fries. They're better fresh, of course. I remember when I ate a lot of them for the first time was the 2006 World Cup right after I graduated high school. And me and my buddy would run out to Skyline during halftime of World Cup games, get chili cheese fries and bring them back. By the time we got back to the house, they're a little bit soggy. Still delicious, but better fresh.
Yeah, that's fine. It balances well because I grew up a cheese fry fan. And I love the chili cheese fries. You're right. They get soggy. I have cheese fries, and then you put a little ketchup on the side, throw some hot sauce in that ketchup. Boom. So, yeah. So my 3, I feel really good, man.
Skyline's deep. We could go deep, and we would be thrilled. We don't even have to get to the Greek salad, man.
I mean, 3-way potato is up there. I mean, I was in on that. Coney Bowl is up there.
Coney Bowl. You like those hot dogs, huh?
Oh man. I mean, chili, hot dog, cheese.
It's classic.
I'm
going to get flamed for passing on the Coney.
And it's going to be at Paycor Stadium this year, which, by the way, we just spent like 6 minutes on this or whatever it is. Call us. At Locked On Bengals listeners, make sure Skyline knows that we gave them some love. So maybe they'll give us some love back.
Just saying, Skyline, this is the easiest sell for me in my life. When I was a kid living in Cincinnati, we went to Skyline every Friday. Every Friday for like 18 years. You know how many trips to Skyline that is? And then when I started driving, you know how many more trips to Skyline that was?
A lot.
And I think I did
many
the math
more
once, and it was like in the thousands. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bengals. We'll be back in the near future with either Duke Tobin's pre-draft presser and or Brian Callahan comments on the offensive approach or his perspective of the offensive approach heading into the 2023 NFL Draft. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks for listening to this episode of Locked On Bengals. Until next time, Hoo Day, and have a good one.